Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why most of the thing. I mean, even all the companies. I think a lot of people don't realize it. You have to manage the cost, and I would, if I want a big hit. So for us, we are a newer distillery. So for us, marrying casks are not exhausted. Most of the marrying casks that used in the Scotch whisky industry after 12 years old, when you try to marry it, are pretty much exhausted wood. Just so that it doesn't impart any flavor. For us at Lakes, I like to keep on the maturation going. So our marrying times are 12 months, but I put them into the same cask and they go into my top tier so I can get that extraction. And I always, I don't know if you guys do the same thing, but I always try to make whiskey or bottle. Of course, sometimes it's not possible, but it is possible during the summer months. So one thing that, I was talking to a colleague in the cognac and brandy industry, and something they do is the sampling and the blending happens in the summer months. And I have pretty much made sure that I do that all the time, because in winter, when you take a sample from the cask, in winter you get a lot more tannins coming through as well, and it's slightly more heavy, slightly more bitter. But if you take the same sample from the same cask, in the summer months, starting from March all the way till July, August, you get a much more lighter character. And again, that goes with the concept of tannins getting absorbed into the wood on certain months of the year, and then the tannins getting released from the wood on certain months of the year. And that helps me blend well as well. So for Lakes, all our releases happen either in March, April, or in July, August timeframe. I don't know if you guys are doing that. Did you find that? I don't know what's.
No, this is more applicable when it comes to, you're from a cooler climate.
Yeah.
It's more applicable to you because here, my average humidity is in excess of 65%. It reaches up to 90% sometimes. And the temperature inside the warehouse is minimum is 23 degrees. It doesn't get lower than that.
Michael, one of the questions I've had through to me is, do you need to change, because of the extremes of temperatures that you're facing, do you need to change the position of the casks within the same warehouse over a given period of time?
Not really, because, in Goa, the temperature is pretty much uniform throughout the year. And also, we don't have much of a fluctuation between day and night. We have pretty much uniform temperature, so you need not change the cask or swap the casks.
Yeah, it almost not happened that you change the place of the cask, but we do monitor the casks really constantly. And
yeah, of course. I mean, you have to every 6 months you have to revisit the casks. Once you.
Yeah.
Is that the same for you, Dhavall, or is that different in a cold climate?
No, I think we move things around, and I mean most of the people who know Lakes and we transfer the liquid as well. But I think we do move cask around because there's something I took from the bourbon industry. Whether it's Woodford Reserve, and that's the first place where I kind of got that understanding better, and it works very well for us. So. For a certain period of time, I don't like to touch the cask, but once it reaches certain maturation or certain extractive levels, we do move things around from one warehouse to the other and move to the other. And sometimes we even move the location. If I think there are certain component parts for sherry that I create, which are much more heavier, and if I leave them up on the top, it can get very, very woody, very tannic. So I do move them around at the bottom as well. And like Michael said, I mean, we nose the cask all the time around. So sometimes maybe a cask is nosed more than 6 times, every 6 months, but we do every 3 months right now. But we do keep an eye. I think that's where I think the art and the black art comes in. I think a lot of people try to think whiskey making is very formulaic, but it is not. It is very intuitive. It is a lot of gut feel. It is a lot of understanding. You have to try to nose the whiskeys and understand what it is trying to say. Sometimes, the liquid will speak for itself, whether it wants to be transferred, whether it wants to be sitting around, or whether it wants to be bottled. And I think that's what probably all the whiskey makers do.
Okay, I have got all sorts of really interesting questions flying in here. I'm conscious that we haven't necessarily talked through one of the whiskies for a while. So we lost you, Michael, just as we were starting to talk about the Paul John select cask. So
Classic.
do you just want to talk through that tasting with everyone in the room with us?
Yeah, I mean, classic is, again, this is matured in ex-bourbon casks. The youngest whiskey in this is 7 years and the oldest is 8 years. This is, again, it's a non-chill filtered whiskey from the underground cellar. This is, again, it has got all the hallmarks of Paul John. It's if you nose on the nose, you get a lot of honey. It has got tropical fruity notes. You have green apple, pineapple, banana. It is nuttier. You have hazelnut. It is slightly spicy. Since it is non-chill filtered on the palate, it is sweet and creamy. Again, you have a lot of honey and caramel. You get typical ex-bourbon characteristics you get. Again, it is long. Again, if you closely notice, it is slightly copperish. It is slightly metallic because this is a 7-year-old whiskey. When I distilled this initially, the copper stills were relatively new. So you have, some part of copper that has come in here. You feel it is copperish, but it is giving extra bite. It is giving an extra layer to the whiskey.
Michael, one thing I have tried to associate all the whiskeys that you make, it has this distinctive aromatic profile on the palate. It is very, very aromatic. It has this exotic incense and aromatic character, which I love about all the products. That
if you see on the palate, it is very salivating. Because, it goes through a very slow and longer fermentation process wherein I produce a lot of esters. It becomes creamy and buttery. And also from Indian barley, you get a lot of sugars. You have barley sugars in it. It is sweet. It has also got it is also slight tannic, if you closely notice.
Michael, do you grow the Indian barley in Goa or in the northern part of India, colder places?
Exactly. I mean, in India, only a few states grow barley. It is on the northern part where the climate is cooler. So mainly it is grown in Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan. The best of the barley comes from Rajasthan and not from the foothills of Himalayas. We all talk about the Himalayas, but the best quality barley is from Rajasthan. So we get the barley from Rajasthan and not from the foothills of Himalayas.
Yeah. You know what? Fascinating, because like I said, before we all started, and I said, I've been dwelling in food and right now, and I've been, driving my wife crazy with all the different spicy combination. I'm trying to be a blender in the kitchen right now. And, one of the things, it's very important. I don't know if most of the people, Rajasthan, right? Rajasthan is a very, very dry, arid land. Nothing grows there. It is very dry desert. It used to be ocean, it's desert right now. And when you stress anything, so you want to grow barley, and when you ask a barley or any kind of plant or anything to grow in a very, very harsh environment, it develops a natural character, full of flavor. And that's something that you can see. I was actually, the reason I am pointing this to Rajasthan is because there's a mirchi, red chili from Rajasthan. And you only get in Rajasthan. And what they use is bed droppings. They use in all these old castles and old palaces they had. And they use those bed droppings to create those chili character. And because it is in such a harsh environment, it has this distinctive character. It's the same concept that we use in fermentation as well, where we are stressing the yeast to the nth degree. We want them to work hard. We want them to get stressed out and then create this beautiful congeners and flavor profiles that give you complexity in your new make spirit at the later end. And, you know, I can understand why you say the barley from Rajasthan is giving you such distinctive character and flavor profile.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, you know, whiskey, you know, every distillery produces, you know, different types of whiskeys. Though we use same ingredients, and end of the day, the flavor profile is different. So this is because, you know, each and every distiller or whiskey maker uses its own method, you know, for the mashing to the fermentation to distillation, and of course, the selection of the cask. So yeah, I mean, see, I think, you know, I heard you talking about your barrel management, the cask management. You think going forward, you know, 10 years down the line, you would be able to do the same thing what you're doing now?
Yes.
When you add up more casks?
Yeah. So, okay. So that's a very, very good question. And I think the question I have been asked before as well is, you know, the way I put together whiskeys is very, very different than, you know, a lot of other people's approach. And my approach comes from Macallan. I mean, that's where I cut my teeth. And I think if I have to put a number, until 5 million liters of alcohol, I can make that happen. So I can still control that nth degree until 5 million. I think 5 million liters of alcohol is where you reach that point where it becomes probably not practicable. And right now we are going to be 500,000 liters. So we are tiny. So I think there is still room to manage. But I hope that answers the question, because see, I think I focus a lot more, and people who know me, I think I focus more on the end side of the project. I start my whiskey making with the product and then go to the cask and then go all the way right. And I think there's no right or wrong answer. But
so when you say 5 million liters, it is approximately 25,000 casks.
Yeah.
So the amount of casks you would be tasting every day is close to 200 barrels.
100 barrels is fine. I can go up to probably 200, 300 based on my Macallan training. So at least we used to go to 400 a day. So I think still okay. But I think there are differences, because when you grow as a company and when you go from 100,000 or 500,000 to 5 million liters, the complexities grow, but at the same time, your understanding of how your environment is behaving, how your casks are behaving, how is your philosophy working also changes. And whiskey making, you have to be very, very dynamic, you know, so you can't be stuck and come with one-sided view of things. And this is how I want it to happen. And this is how, because you learn constantly. So, you know, my answer is, you know, it can work, but I think you have a lot of other things ironed out by that time where you are just focusing on certain nuances and characters. So, you know, I that's my answer. But
because see, I purely speak based on my experience and from where I come. Means I'm talking about the environment here. You know, every day whiskey changes here, because you know it's warm, it's humid, it is, you know. So for me, it is tough, honestly speaking. Managing at, you know, at micro level is next to impossible.
Yeah, yeah, and I think to counter argue there, I think for us, because our whiskey is not changing daily, and I think, you know, Grace is online right now, who's my colleague who works very closely with me, and we anytime anything is below 6 months, we don't worry about it. We continue. So for us, the material difference, if I have to call it a material difference, it happens around 6 months time frame. So I'm looking around 6 months, depending, as long as there's no summer involved in that, 6 months is when I'm looking at different cask profiles. And I know it sounds crazy, but that's the technique that I have been used to. And, you know, my ex-colleague, Max McFarlane, who's a Highland Park whiskey maker, and we used to go through probably 300-400 casks a day, and that's what the training is. So I think it should be manageable. But like I said, beyond 5 million, I know I have precisely calculated. I'm a guy who goes through the N degree and tries to figure out the number. So for me, 5 million is my number. If you go about that, you can't make this work. So.
Right, Jen, I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, because I've got lots of questions and lots of people eager to ask. So I'm going to ask a question on behalf of one of our guests. When you create an expression, do you have something in mind, like a particular inspiration, or do you just work with the casks that you've got that are ready?
Well, I always have something in mind, but not from a particular inspiration of other whiskey, but just from what I imagine. And I think when you're talking about blending or creating whiskey, you must imagine a lot. So I just imagine the taste that I want and start playing with it.
Yeah, I agree with Tomer. And probably if my mom is listening right now, I mean, she would realize why I was daydreaming so much when I was a little boy. But absolutely. I mean, it doesn't, you know, forget that, oh, this is the cask I have and I have to make something out of it. And I think for me, you know, the 2 bottlings that we did and all the bottlings I do, it starts with something that I want to express. I use whiskey as a language, you know, and a creativity to express ideas and emotions. So our Whiskey Makers Reserve first was very, very on the face, very confident, very bold, comes out, you know, on your face and looks at you. And Whiskey Makers Reserve number 2 is much more elegant. I want it to be more restrained, more confident in itself. And the number 3 that's coming out is seductive and aromatic, you know, so it's all those emotions that we take and then we try to express that. So rather than looking at what cask I have, I look at what I want to create, and then I look at what cask I have and how do I blend those casks to create those different flavor profiles. But over to you, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do a lot of whiskey tastings, you know. So the first question that comes up is, you know, how do you compare your whiskey with Amrut or any other whiskey? Yeah. So I always tell them each and every whiskey is different. There is no good or bad whiskey. Every whiskey is different, because end of the day, you know, what you have inside is somebody's emotions that is bottled. Because we all, you know, keep something or somebody in mind and we create some expressions. So, yeah, I mean, I always, you know, somebody or the other, something or the other inspires me when I, you know, I keep something in my mind and create some expressions.
And now we've got an aspiring blender who's asked that actual question. Have you got any specific advice for him?
Wow.
The multi-million-dollar question. I mean, I guess, like, how did Tomer, how did you, for example, get into whiskey making?
Well, actually, I came into the alcohol business about 20 years ago, and whiskey caught me from the beginning. So I just started to experience and distill at home and dealing with all whiskey stuff and drink a lot. But to be a good blend, or not to be a good blender, but to make a good blend, I think it's first of all imagination. Second, train your palate a lot, taste a lot, and actually you have some kits with a lot of tastes, smell a lot. It's a lot of nose working, and just taste as much as you can and imagine.
Michael, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I think passion and patience is the key. You know, you should have a lot of passion, and you should have a lot of patience. Another thing is, again, you have to cultivate a lot of other habits. You know, I had a habit of smelling things, you know, the different things. whether it is honey or the petals or the leaves. So that is how there is something called mental library. When you taste or smell something, unknowingly everything gets registered in your mind. So I think these are the few things you have to adapt.
Dhavall?
Yeah. Wow. It's a good question, and something I I'm keep on bringing Grace and Vaibhav here, my two my colleagues that I work with, and I tell them often. I think first thing is you have to be very, very clear in your mind. What do you want to become? Do you want to become a blender, or do you want to become a distiller? A lot of people get those boundaries very mixed up. It's very, very different. The approach is very different. The philosophy and mindset is very different. And as Michael said, I mean, the first thing you require is the ability to know things. And, I was crazy. When I was in school, I used to smell pencils. So I used to open my, my classmates' pencil box, and I used to just smell it. I love that smell. I love the smell of wood and pencils, and I couldn't recognize which brand of pencil it was, just by nosing it. And so I would do with the erasers as well. And I know we had a few girls in my class, and I'm talking about when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And I had girls in my class, and they used to have erasers which had perfume, rose flavors, and those when you erase something and you get this flavor of some fruit or strawberries or something like that. And I used to be fascinated by all those flavors. The first thing is you need to know things, and you need to have the ability to know it. If you can't know it, I can't help you, neither can Michael or Tomer, or neither can anybody else. So you need to know it. Once you know that's your fundamental thing, then you need to understand, and you have the imagination and the creativity to understand what do you do with those flavors. Nosing is okay. There are better nosers than me in the world. There's, nosing, there are a lot of super nosers as well. But what do you do with those nose matters a lot. And also, like one of the points that Michael said, which I relate to a lot, is you also have to do a lot of other things. When you cook, try to play around with the smells.
When I cook, I always use my nose. I don't know. I use a lot of ingredients that I don't know, and I always smell and just try to put it if I think it will fix.
Absolutely. And also try to, the best smells, I'm a bookie and I love books. The best smell ever is just going through a book, an old book. And that gives you, if you know that old book, you will know how to blend sherry cask, because you will learn how to avoid anything musty and sulfury characters out of it. So, try to be involved, try to be aware about your surrounding. When you're sitting around, when you're in a bar, try to smell. I know it's creepy, it sounds creepy, but try to smell the lady sitting next to you, her perfume. What's smelling for? What is the food the person is eating on the next table? Constantly be aware, start playing around with aromas in your head and imagination. I think that's the best advice. And be focused. Know exactly what. Do you want to be in production? Do you want to be a distiller and worry about day-to-day the distilling side of things? Or do you want to be in your own little world and be creative? That's a very different
everything.
Yes.
Dhavall, while we've got you on the screen, would you like to talk around the fourth whiskey of tonight, which is from the Lakes Distillery, one of your creations, Whiskey Makers Reserve?
Yes, absolutely. So what we are having is Lakes Whiskey Makers Reserve number 2. And unlike my colleagues here, and my style is very, very heavy, sherry bomb. It's packed with flavor. It has a wood influence and it has intense character. That's the style I love drinking. That's the style I love making. So what you are nosing right now, or what you're having, is a PX cask, predominantly PX. Normally the house style of Lakes is geared around Oloroso, but this is PX with Oloroso and a little bit of bourbon cask. And when I say a little bit of bourbon cask, is 1 or 2 bourbon casks to actually pull the flavors that you get in the sherry cask. And I love sherry, and that's I'm a student of sherry cask maturation. So all the style that I create will be pretty much geared towards sherry. So it is robust. It is cask strength. So, and it's natural color, non-chill filtered. The one thing you will notice right off the bat, that even though it is cask strength, it's over 60% alcohol by volume, there won't be any hit or burn. And that is the style of blending or the style of layering that you can allow to create that. But it is a different style. You tried 3 different styles today, but I'll look forward to hearing your thoughts. That's the style we have. It's more PX and a lot of sherry driven. This is the house style. One of the things that I want to kind of clarify, I have been asked that question a lot. Whiskey makers 1, 2, 3, 4, are they different batches? They are not different batches. They are just different expressions of emotions. As Tomer mentioned earlier, number 1 was much more on the face, much more robust. Number 2 was much more elegant. Number 3 that's coming out is much more seductive and aromatic. So it's just a way of expressing different emotions based on the different sherry profile and the cask we have.
Dhavall, I must say that I really like everything that you did so far, and you gave me to taste number 3 also at one show, and I really like it.
Thank you very much, Tomer. And I love.
But I never got a chance to taste your whiskeys. I have a couple of questions here. When you say the sherry finish,
yeah.
Do you season the cask with fresh wines, or how is it? I mean, what kind of a cask do you use?
No, good question. So we use both casks. We use the Solera. I don't like to differentiate, but we use the Solera cask as well. Excuse me. And then we have custom bespoke casks that are made based on my specifications, and that is seasoned cask, sherry seasoned cask, using different oaks, different toasting levels, different seasoning times, different sherry wines. So we use both casks when I'm talking about sherry. And again, it depends on what flavor or character I'm trying to highlight. So if I am trying to highlight a much more richer, denser PX or Oloroso character, I'm going more towards my Spanish oak seasoned cask. If I'm trying to highlight certain aromatic nature, whether it's the right ginger or a little bit of nutmeg and sultana, I'm going more towards my bodega cask. So it's a combination of both casks that I use in the blend, depending on how I'm trying to create. Does that help, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Solera, most of the older cask, the biggest drawback is the sulfur. So how do you control the trace of sulfur in your whiskeys?
All right. Okay. So that is probably the first training I ever got at Macallan, and just to weed out certain off notes or certain characters that I don't want. So when Solera cask, I think the problem that happens with Solera cask normally is Solera casks are only available when a bodega goes out of business or runs out of money, or the cask is so bad that the bodega decides to discard the cask out. But then, based on the connections that you have, you might be able to source really, really good cask. But anytime the cask comes back, I know exactly, I'm nosing that cask. So, one of my colleagues will go and nose the cask first thing to just identify any off flavors or any infection that you might see or any sulfur characters that coming out. And then we keep on seeing. Then I nose each and every cask at 3 months. So 3 months, no matter what happens, each and every cask that we produce at Lakes get nosed under me at 3 months. That's when I weed out the things. So I don't want to leave on problems for much more longer. But I know a few good producers, and I happen to have one of the best mentors in the industry. So, I'm lucky to get some good bodega casks whenever I want them. So that's what I use.
Okay. Do you prefer more of the newly aged? Sorry, Christy.
Sorry, Michael. No, you carry on. Sorry to interrupt.
Do you prefer more of a freshly made aged barrels, or do you prefer more of a Solera, the historical casks?
To answer your, it's a great question. I mean, okay, I'll answer that other way, and then I'll come back to this. Like any blender, I love refill casks, and I love casks that give me a perfect balance of distillate character and the character of the cask that I'm looking for. Now, when I'm talking about, it depends on the style I'm trying to create. If you look at the whiskey makers reserve number 1, that had much more of the sherry season cask. Whiskey maker 2 has a little bit of much more of the influence of the Bodega cask. I prefer both. If I am looking for a much more longer maturation period, I'm looking for 12 years, 18 years, 16 years time in UK style, then I'm looking much more on the Bodega style character, which gives me a good balance. Because if I'm using a Spanish oak cask, which is very, a seasoned cask, I might get a very, very strong hit of tannins in the early 3 years. So depending on the style I'm creating, but I do prefer a good balance of sherry and distillate character that it works in harmony rather than one overpowering the other.
Fair enough.
What about you? What's the style you like?
Again, I mean, mostly I'm using the freshly seasoned casks because it's more for me. Again, it's all about balance. For some reason, I love American oak. The amount of the flavor profile you get, and the amount of extraction you get, which combined with some of the sherry flavors, I think it makes it works for me.
Yeah.
You can see here, the amount of extraction I get, it looks like the black coffee.